Wealth can wane. Kinsmen of influence will eventually die. With time, you too shall die. But I know of one thing that will die not, and that's the reputation of a man who's earned his draft at Sumbo. Come closer and let an old skald preserve the immortality of one such soul. And I'd like to read from the Heimskringla. You can find this between chapters 65 and 87. The same harvest King Olaf summoned the bonds to the thing of the 4 districts at Dragseed in Strad. And there the people from Soin, the fjord districts, Southmore, and Romsdal were summoned to meet. King Olaf came there with a great many people who had followed him from the westward, and also those who had joined him in Rogaland and Hordaland. When the kings came to the thing, he proposed to them, as elsewhere, Christianity. And as the king of such a powerful host with them, they were frightened. The king offered them 2 conditions, to either accept Christianity or to fight. But the bonds saw they were in no condition to fight the king, and resolved therefore that all the people should agree to be baptized. The king proceeded afterwards to Northmore, and baptized all that district. He then sailed to Hlader in Trondheim, and had the temple there razed to the ground, and took all the ornaments and all the property out of the temple, and from the gods in it, and among other things, the great gold ring which Earl Hakon had ordered to be made, and which hung in the door of the temple, and then had the temple burnt. When the bonds heard of this, they sent out a war arrow as a token through the whole district, ordering out a warlike force, intended to meet the king with it. In the meantime, King Olaf sailed with a war force out of the fjord, along the coast northward, intending to proceed to Hålogaland and baptize there. When he came north to the Bjarnar, he heard from Hålogaland that a force was assembled there to defend the country against the king. The chiefs of this force were Herrick of Throdja, Thorder, Hjort from Vagar, and Eyvind Kinrifa. Now when King Olaf heard of this, he turned about and sailed southwards along the land. And when he got south of Stad, proceeded at his leisure. There was a bond by the name of Raud the Strong, who dwelt in Godi, in Sultan Fjord. Raud was a fine, very rich man, who had many house servants, and likewise was a powerful man, who had many Finns, which probably means magicians, in his service, when he wanted them. Raud was a great idolater, and very skillful in witchcraft, most likely seether, and was a great friend of Thorder, Hjort, before spoken of. Both were great chiefs. Now when they heard that King Olaf was coming with a great force from the south to Hålogaland, they gathered together an army, ordered out ships, and they too had a great force on foot. Raud had a large ship with gilded head formed like a dragon, which ship had 30 rowing benches, and even for that kind of ship was very large. Thorder, Hjort, also had a large ship. These men sailed southwards with their ships against King Olaf, and as soon as they met, gave battle. A great battle there was, and a great fall of men, but principally on the side of the Hålogalanders, whose ships were cleared of men, so that a great terror came upon them. Raud rode with his dragon out to the sea and set sail. Raud had always had a fair wind wheresoever he wished to sail, which came from his arts of witchcraft, And to make a short story, he came home to Godi. Thor Hjort fled from the ships up to the land, but King Olaf landed people, followed by those who fled, and killed them. Usually the king was the foremost in such skirmishes, and was now so. When the king saw there Thor Hjort, who was quicker on foot than any man, was giving to, he ran after him with his dogs. "Vig," the king said. "Vig, Vig, catch the deer." Vig ran straight at him. Thor struck with his sword at the dog, and gave him a great wound. But at the same moment, the king's spear flew under Thor's arm, and went through him. It came out at his other side. There Thor left his life, but Vig was carried off to the ships. King Olaf gave life and freedom to all men who asked it and agreed to become Christian. King Olaf sailed with his fleet northwards along the coast and baptized all the people among whom he came. And when he came north to Salten Fjord, he intended to sail and look into it for Raud. But a dreadful tempest and storm was raging in the fjord. They lay there a whole week, in which the same weather was raging within the fjord, while without there was a fine brisk wind only, fair for proceeding north along the land. Then the king continued his voyage north to Omd, where all the people submitted to Christianity. Then the king turned about and sailed to the south again. But when he came to the north side of Salten Fjord, the same tempest was blowing, and the sea ran high out from the fjord, and the same kind of storm prevailed for several days while the king was lying there. Then the king applied to Bishop Sigurd, and asked him if he knew any counsel about it. The bishop said he would try if God would give him power to conquer the arts of the devil. Bishop Sigurd took all of his mass robes and went forward to the bow of the king's ship. He ordered tapers, candles, to be lighted, and incense to be brought out. Then he set the crucifix upon the stern of the vessel, read the evangelist and many prayers. He sprinkled the whole ship with holy water, and then ordered the ship tent to be stowed away, and to row into the fjord. The king ordered all the other ships to follow him. Now when all was ready on board the crane to row, she went into the fjord without the rowers finding any wind, and the sea was curled about their keel track, like in a calm. So quiet and still was the water, yet on each side of them the waves were lashing up so high they hid sight to the mountains. And so the one ship followed the other in the smooth sea track. And they proceeded this way the whole day and night until they reached Godi. Now when they came to Raud's house, his great ship the dragon was afloat close to the land. King Olaf went up to the house immediately with his people, made an attack on the loft which Raud was sleeping, and broke it open. The men rushed in. Raud was taken and bound, and of the people with him, some were killed and some were made prisoners. Then the king's men went to a lodging in which Raud's house servants slept, and killed some, bound others, and beat others. Then the king ordered Raud to be brought before him, and offered him a baptism. And says the king, "I will not take thy property from thee, but rather be thy friend, if thou wilt make thyself worthy to be so." Raud exclaimed with all his might against the proposal, saying that he would never believe in Christ, and making his scoff of God. The king was wroth, and said Raud should die the worst of deaths. And the king ordered him to be bound to a beam of wood, with his face uppermost, and a round pin of wood set between his teeth to force his mouth open. Then the king ordered an adder, a snake, to be stuck into the mouth of him, but the serpent would not go, into his mouth, but shrunk back when Raud was breathed against it. Now the king ordered a hollow branch of an angelica root to be struck into Raud's mouth. Others say the king put his horn into his mouth and forced the serpent to go in by holding a red-hot iron before the opening. So the serpent crept into the mouth of Raud and down his throat, and gnawed its way out of the side, and thus Raud perished. King Olaf took here much gold and silver, and other property or weapons, and many sorts of precious effects. And all the men who were with Raud he either baptized, or if they refused, had them killed or tortured. Then the king took the dragon ship, which Raud had owned, and steered it himself, for it was much larger and handsomer vessel than the crane. In front of it had a dragon's head, and aft a crook, which turned up and ended with the figure of the dragon's tail. He carved the work on each side of the stem, and the stern was gilded. This ship the king called the Serpent. When the sails were hoisted, they represented, as it were, the dragon's wings, and the ship was the handsomest in all Norway. The islands on which Raud dwelt were called the Gilling and the Herring, but the whole islands together were called the Godi Islands, and the current between the isles maintained the Godi stream. King Olaf baptized the whole people of the fjord, and then sailed southwards along the land. And on this voyage happened much and various things which are set down in tales and sagas, namely how witches and evil spirits tormented his men, and sometimes himself. But we will rather not write about it, what occurred when King Olaf made Norway Christian, or in the other countries in which he advanced Christianity. Hail, Raud the Strong. Hail, all those who fight in strife. Hail the folk, and hail to you, my friend. Thank you for listening and helping preserve the immortality of Raud the Strong.